Hello everyone. So we are continuing with the discussions from the text readings on Kerala. Today I'm planning to work on this chapter, Myth and Literature, which is a speech excerpt by M.T. Vasudevan Nair. It has been taken from a collection of speeches which is published by Sahitya Academy in 1995. And M.T. Vasudevan Nair, of course, is somebody who needs no introduction to us Keralites. And the kind of contributions that he has made to the cultural and literary scenario of Kerala is something that all of us value very deeply. The kind of literary works that he has produced, Randamuzham, Nalighettu, and Many Kalam, Asuravithu, all these are works which have made a very deep impact in the minds of us Keralites, and also his contributions to cinema. Works like Nirmalyam, Viruchirubunjiri, and his role as a scriptwriter in Oru Vadakkan, Veeragatha, then Sadayam, Parinayam, and also his early career as an editor in association with Mathrubhumi also is very significant. So altogether, it wouldn't the kind of time that will be there for this video will not be enough for me to continue talking about M.T. Vasudevan Nair sir. The kind of transformation that he brought into Malayalam literary scenario, the kind of creative interventions that he has made in Malayalam literary scenario, the kind of versatility that he has shown as a writer, as a director, as a script writer, as a songwriter, is just amazing. It's something that adds much value to the scenario of social, cultural, and literary scenario of Kerala. And his influence in the literary scenario continues even today. Now, this particular extract is from a speech that he made, and this, as the title itself says, is about myth and literature. Now, all of you must be very familiar with the word myth, mythology, legend, etc. These are especially in the context of India, these words are very important because these are all very interconnected. Myths and legends are actually confused with the history, and they impact a very deep influence in the lives of people even today. It's not like myths and legends are treated as imaginary stories which do not have any realistic backing, but rather the kind of influence that they exert in the Indian scenario is actually very different. They often are intermixed with history, intermixed with the social reality of India. So myths and legends are actually very deeply connected to the Indian cultural scenario. This is probably what he talks about also. He tries to find a link between myth and literature, especially in the scenario of Kerala, how they are connected. He begins the excerpt by mentioning the connection between myth, literature, history, and all. And he mentions, works like Mahabharata and Ramayana. Even though these are, considered pan-Indian works, they actually draw a lot of elements from regional mythology or regional stories or regional legends. And what is very interesting is that all these, even though we consider this as a very, one-dimensional work, these, pan-Indian narratives actually have multiple representations or multiple versions in different regional, or different localities or different geographical areas. It shows the kind of cultural richness of India, and it also shows the kind of regional variety which is there in India. Often, what happens is that in the case of India, because translations between Indian languages are actually very less, a kind of inquiry into these kinds of varieties has not been that much possible. MT also mentions that. And these myths and stories are not just stories for people, but rather these are works which exert a lot of influence on the social and cultural life of communities, especially in India, where many ideas or social hierarchies or belief systems are actually influenced from these myths and legends. I myself remember once having met a person who does research in mythology, and he asked me a very interesting question: what actually is a myth? Why do you call something a myth? So I did not have a proper answer as such. I told him that it's probably a story which was there, which has been passed on for generations. So he said, do you think that these stories are actually realistic? So I said, no, these are not realistic. They almost always have some kind of a strange or a magical presence in them. It is beyond realism or beyond mundane reality. Mostly myth and legends uh, are full of possibilities of imagination. That's probably what makes it very interesting to us. And a perfect example is that of Aidihya. I'm not very sure how many of you would have heard of Aidihya. There is a mention about that in this text also, which is a collection of stories of regional legends. Aidihya has many interesting stories. Probably the story of Kalyanga to Neeli and all are from Aidihya. It is written by Kottarathil Shangunni. Yes, and MT also mentions the mythological story behind the origin of Kerala also, or not a mythological story, but the legend of Parashuraman. The story is there that Parashuraman, when he had committed a sin by murdering multiple kshatriyas, and he had to repent for his sin. So, in order to confess, or in order to make up for his sins, or to absolve himself of those sins, he actually gave all his land and ancestral property to Kashyapa Muni. And when Kashyapa Muni reminded him that you presently don't have a land of your own to claim. So he then, what he does is, you already know the story, right? He throws his axe over the sea, over what we call now as the Arabian Sea, and from the place he was standing on Mount Gokarna, and then he threw his axe, and from there, where the axe went and landed, the sea parted and land came up, which we presently identify as Kerala. That is a kind of a story which is there. It might be a mythological story, but many people actually do consider it as a very significant, backdrop of Kerala's history. Even in works like Kerala Ulpatti, you can see that this being treated as a very credible story. And it need not be that the whole axe throwing and the sea parting happened, but rather it could be interpreted as, probably, as MT says, it could be showing the Aryan invasion of the Dravidian land, which was probably led by Parashurama. Aryans invading the Dravidian lands of Kerala and setting up, a kind of civilization there. It could, that story could have evolved from that. That's also there, and all the cultural practices and rituals which are present in Kerala could have been mandated by Parashurama. This kind of a concept is also there. And this Parashurama story has actually been an inspiration for multiple poems, which also MT has mentioned. Balamani Amma's writings perceives the action of throwing away the axe as an example of sacrifice. And then Vailopilli, his poem salutes the axe as a tool that pierces the depths of forest in order to find shelter for the migrant societies. That the axe is a tool which is used to clear forests and set up civilizations there, right? So migrants come and they make a life in forests with the help of the axe. So the axe can also be thought about as a symbol of migration and making up of settlements by human beings. So in that way, even though the myth sounds like a story, it could also have a lot of historical underpinnings, or it could also be a kind of a backdrop for history. That's something which these writers are coming to. But he says that now the myth actually is related to the sea, right? The sea parted, and then Kerala was born. Kerala is actually surrounded by sea, and the Arabian Sea, and Kerala has actually seen a lot of wars happening in the Arabian Sea itself. The battles between Portuguese, Dutch, French, and then the English. All these journeys and battles Kerala has actually witnessed. But the fiction writers of Kerala have actually not made that much use of the sea legends and the stories about the sea in literature. That is something that MT mentions. But in cinema, often these references of the sea can be seen, and also regional folk tales, influence of the regional folk tales regarding sea can also be seen. He quotes the example of Chemmin, where the legend or the what to say regional folktale that the sea is conceived as a mother, or the sea is believed to be a kind of a mother figure, or what we call as the Kadalamma. And Kadalamma actually protects, or the mother figure actually protects these men who go for fishing into the sea. And it is the chastity of this regional belief that it is the chastity of the women who wait in the land for these men that actually protects these men. And whenever this kind of a chastity is breached, what happens is the men suffer in the sea. The lives of these men are taken by the sea goddess, or the mother of the sea. So that idea can be seen being used in Chemin. Now, Tagari has actually been criticized for using this kind of regressive belief system in his writing. It can actually be interpreted to be very regressive, but these are the kinds of folk tales and folk belief systems that have existed in Kerala, and them being used is actually a process of a kind of a cultural accumulation itself. That is what we can understand. And as we move on, MT tells us how these myths and legends have been employed by prominent story writers and even poets. Then there are many other mentions. Even he mentions the kind of most of the writers actually stayed away from these myths and legends due to the reason of most of these writers having an inclination towards leftist ideas, which are very realistic or very practical. And these myths and legends were not that compatible with these progressive ideas of the left, which relied on realism. That is probably why the modern storytelling tradition actually did not rely much on these myths and folk tales, or these colorful tales. Maybe that's a possibility that MT thinks about. And also he mentions the interesting incident of how Eഴുത്തച്ഛൻ, who's considered the father of Malayalam language, he was mostly compared to a Gandharvan, a kind of an ethereal spirit, because he did not have a very, privileged upbringing. But even then, he was able to produce so much of creative and imaginative works in exceptional language. So he himself has been compared to the figure of the Gandharvan. And even these kinds of spiritual and magical interventions can be seen in the case of many writers like Poondanam and Melpatur Narayana Bhattadari, etc. A kind of a spiritual intervention coming into their writing. These kinds of things can be seen. These are reminders of these kinds of connections between literature, creativity, imagination, and these kinds of spiritual experiences, or mythological or magical stories. And he also mentions how modernist writers like O.V. Vijayan, Kovilan, Punaptil Kuny Abdullah, and M. Mugundan, and N.P. Muhammad, etc., they also tried to incorporate mythological ideas into their works. And especially modern, younger novelists like K.P. Ramanunni and T.V. Kochubava, they also go against the concept of a realistic and very linear plot. Usually what happens in traditional novels is that they try to be more realistic, and one event follows the other. It sort of develops in a very linear plot. But in folk tales and all, it is not like that. They can begin somewhere, they can end somewhere. They had this possibility of being as creative and as imaginative as possible. Somebody could not say that this cannot happen in a mythical story. That can happen. Somebody can have magical experiences. Someone can have very out of the world or extraordinary experiences. That is possible in the case of folk tales and mythical tales. So many modern writers actually started experimenting with the techniques of realism, and also intermixing them with the ideas of mythology and legends, etc. Yes, and Then, of course, O.V. Vijayan's Khasakinde Dihasam is a very powerful example of a kind of a nostalgic going back to many of the mythical elements can be seen in that work. And Yes, he further goes, to say how these new scientific and objective tendencies actually look down upon these mythological tales, and they criticize this tendency to mistake history and cultural history and geographical history with mythology. Most of the time, even now, when we look at the history of many places or cultures, especially in the case of India, we can see that it is actually very intermixed or overlap with mythological stories or legends. So this is very much against that of scientific objectivity and modern knowledge systems, right? And they criticize it as these are just fancies of a very superstitious kind of a society. We cannot actually dismiss them completely as superstitions, but rather, even though they are products of imagination, these products actually are born out of certain cultures. When something magical is imagined by somebody, it is not at all related to that society from which it is born, but rather it is those social conditions that help that person creatively imagine something or creatively build connections to create something magical. So we cannot completely ignore myths and legends, saying that they are not practical, they are not pragmatic, and they are actually products of the workings of the human psyche. That's what MT comes to, and they are very deeply associated with civilizations and their cultural history. So, in order to understand the past, we cannot only rely on logical and chronological and practical history, but these folk tales and mythological tales also tell us about the cultures from which they are born, and the kind of boundless possibilities of imagination. That is what MT concludes the speech with. So this is a small excerpt which has been probably translated by the editors of the text itself, but it's a very interesting excerpt. It kind of shows how these myths and legends exert a lot of influence in our minds, in our ways of living, in our belief systems, and in our understanding of history even now. Even now, many values like honesty or goodness, what is good, what is bad, all these have actually been, um, engraved into our minds through these mythological tales and all. So we cannot dismiss them as mere imagination, but rather they are also very significant forces of culture. Yes, with that, I'll conclude this excerpt. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.